Good morning and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is listening. But before we get started, let's take a minute to just settle in. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose. Hold it and feel that oxygen just moving through your body, enlivening all your cells, bringing vital energy to you and through you. And as you exhale any tension in your jaw, in your neck, your back, your shoulders, your hips. And let's take another deep breath in through your nose. Hold it and imagine sparkling white light just coursing through your every molecule and every cell and throughout your body and beyond. And as you exhale any tension remaining, any stress, just relax and allow yourself to be here. Let's just take our palms and press them gently together. Softly, softly, softly rub your fingers against your palms and feel the tickling in your fingers and the tickling in your palms and how delicious that is. And bring yourselves present to being here right now in your body at this moment. So welcome. I'm so glad to be here with you this morning. And I'm excited to talk about listening. I think that we have a bunch of different ideas about listening, and oftentimes when we listen to others, we're listening with an ear to what we're going to say in response. So, what is listening, and how does who we bring ourselves to listening as impact what we're hearing? Hi, Dido. Good morning. Welcome. Thanks so much for being here. We're talking about listening. So, when we listen, we're listening through filters. And we may or may not be aware of that. And sometimes, as I mentioned, we listen with an ear to what we can say in response, or we don't even so much listen as we wait for the other person to finish talking before we start talking to say whatever it is we want to communicate. And I'm wondering, what's the shift that's available to us as we deeply listen from a place of understanding. And they're all different angles that we can engage with this from. So I can be listening to hear what someone's motivation is. I can be listening to the words that they use to see, are they attacking me? Or are they connecting with me? I can listen to hear what their story is, what their perspective is. And so much of our communication is based in the way that we listen. So let's do an exploration together of what it means to really, really listen to another person, and then be moved to a response based on what you heard. So when we have an agenda, we listen differently from when we feel defensive, and we listen differently when we feel defensive from when we feel connected and loving or trusting or present. And so I'm wondering if anybody listening now has ever experienced a time when maybe with a family member that you've listened to or you've interacted with for so long that you listen with an ear to knowing what they're going to say, knowing where they're coming from, and maybe in a particular moment you listened differently. For some reason you listened like with a different sense of presence, where you could hear what they were saying as if it didn't have anything to do with you. Maybe you could hear it more objectively. and it created some kind of revelation for you. I'm just wondering if a shift of listening, if you've ever been able to experience a shift of listening that opened up a whole new capability for depth in your relationship, or no, a whole new capacity for a deeper connection. So I notice in family is the place where we get most reactive, right? So I've had lots of very heated interactions with my brother, and on occasion, uh, in the more recent past, I've had the ability to be present to what he is saying without running my story around what he's saying, so that I could actually listen to him. And one of the things that I've noticed is that as over the years I've become less defensive, I've been able to be more present and listen to what other people are saying, to be able to respond rather than react. I'm wondering, have you guys experienced this? Like, is there a relationship that you have where you find it's tough to listen? It's tough to listen because you've heard it so many times, or it's always an attack, or it's always the same old story in terms of complaint, or the life view that someone is expressing feels like it's really challenging to you. Have you ever experienced that, and where you were able to wake up to it in the midst of it? Hello, Abuelita. So wonderful to have you here. Thank you for your good morning, or your beautiful hello. We're talking about listening. So I have a client who has experiences of a lot of conflict with family, and they invited me to listen in on a conversation that was had, and with them and one of their family members, and I was able to reflect back to them the defensiveness that they were expressing in their response, in their listening. So, Abuelita says, my husband, when he gets into politics, I don't want to listen. Oh my gosh. Okay, so you make a really good point there, Abuelita. With political conversations, they can get very heated and crazy, and it makes it really hard to listen sometimes because we get very emotionally engaged in these things. And it's interesting. It's interesting if we can set ourselves apart a little bit from personalizing the conversation and hearing things as an attack, because we're sensitive, because maybe we have certain insecurities, and the people that we're listening to or having a conversation with just know how perfectly to press all our buttons, and get us activated, and we get worked up into a state pretty quickly. So what would it be to actually hear what the conversation is, or what someone's point of view is, if they're not just ranting? I mean, if they're ranting, maybe it's hard to listen, right? But that's not really a communication as much as it is venting. But when somebody is actually trying to communicate, and even let's look at this political thing. Um, I know that for myself, it's easy to get triggered into these political stances, and we have to, dig our feet in, and be right, or know the right answer, or defend our position. And I'm wondering what's available if we can sort of separate ourselves a little bit, at least, from personalizing all these conversations, to hearing what the vantage point is of the other person. So I have a family member who has radically different political views to mine. And I am actually really curious how this person could hold the beliefs that they do. However, there's whenever that we begin a conversation, it gets completely shut down, and I'm not the one that shuts it down. So it's interesting because I'm really curious. I'm really curious. It's like, what is the vantage point that allows for that view? Um, and I think that if we allow ourselves an exploration of what it is to truly listen, it's actually to be receptive, to be willing to receive the message that the other person is giving without all of our own stuff in the middle, without our own insecurities or our own uh, positions. If we're able to receive in a way that is non judgmental. And that's a huge challenge, right? Like, I'm asking you guys to tell me, have you been able, like, is there a conversation that you've had that you can remember where you were able to engage without judgment, where you were able to, like, really hear somebody saying something that is completely opposite of what you believe, for instance. And out of that conversation, what's possible? Is it possible for us to connect with one another, truly connect compassionately with love and appreciation for one another, even though we have radically differing beliefs? And this is an important exploration right now because there are so many heightened, emotionally charged issues that exist in the world right now. And oftentimes when we listen, we're trying to convince somebody else. We're listening for where we can have an inroad to convince somebody else of our own opinion or our own vantage point. And what's available if we can listen to another person as a human being who is worthy of the same respect that we deserve. And so political conversations, I remember having a very profound conversation with someone on a very different side of an issue from me. And we were able, through our conversation, to actually truly deepen a connection. And at the end, we agreed to disagree, but we held each other with respect and reverence. And I think the bottom line of this listening conversation really is about showing and sharing respect for one another. And when we do that, miracles can happen. Have you had an experience, like Abuelita, maybe has there ever been an experience with even with politics with your husband? Has there ever been a time when you were able to reach a deeper understanding between one another? To Because I know when I have really strong feelings about something, sometimes it's hard for me to hear beyond that. Sometimes it's hard for me to entertain the alternative possibilities, as you know, how could somebody really be thinking that? And so an exercise that we might invite ourselves into is to imagine what it would be to be that person believing what they believe. Like, just to step into what would that person have to believe to think those things that they were thinking. So for instance, in a conversation like this family member that has very, very differing beliefs, what I can imagine for this person is that their position is coming from a place of fear in a certain respect. And I notice in my awareness of that, that also my stance is coming from a place of fear, but our fears are different. And as I can recognize the fears of this other person, then I have the ability to have greater compassion for them. Dido says, yesterday I got into the same old trivial complaint with my significant other about using the kitchen cutting board. I managed to take a breath, remind myself that kindness matters. I reread a sign I have outside the house and apologized for being irritable. We both realized we were generally just hot and irritable. We managed to reset from listening fresh. We managed to reset from listening fresh, setting aside old baggage from the past. Then we went for a short walk, which I find is best when talking about things. There's so much there to unpack, Dido. That's awesome. So, yes, in the course of conversations that may get heated, if we have the grace of a moment to be able to step back and see ourselves and choose whether that's the person we want to be in that moment, then we get to create a reset. So that's hugely powerful, Dido, that you were able to take a breath and remind yourself of your values, to remind yourself that kindness matters and that how you were being wasn't your preferred behavior. And so that's hugely powerful to just take that breath, step back. It takes a tremendous act of commitment and will to do that, to stop ourselves midstream, to just sort of step back and say, wait a second, is this how I want to be? Is this how I want to express? And then you were able to take ownership of the way that you saw yourself being that was out of alignment with your intention. And you made an apology and you expressed it to the other person, which was also taking tremendous amount of courage and commitment to your values and how you want to be. So that's amazing. And as you did that, it created an opening for your partner to be able to recognize their behavior and to come forward with connection after you offered your hand in communication, which is so wonderful. And you both moved to a new place. So the dynamic of that is just phenomenal and such a perfect example of what's possible when we also listen to ourselves and how we're being in a given moment. Abuelita says, what I do is just walk away because I don't believe the way that he believes, and he's not going to change the way I believe. To me, by just walking away, I keep peace in the valley. Well, I agree with you, Abuelita, that sometimes walking away is the fastest path to peace. Um, and and I wonder what might happen if it were possible to come to a place to say, you know what? I get that you don't agree or that we believe differently, and I respect your right to believe how you believe. What might that open? What might that open instead of creating the or perpetuating the oppositional nature of these conversations, which, you know, the political divide is a really big thing these days, and it creates so much hostility between people. And when we just walk away, and sometimes it's the best thing to do, absolutely, but when we just walk away, we leave things, it's kind of discounting what the other person believes, or even discounting the other person. And every time that happens, there's like more and more of a separation that gets generated or nurtured, and more distance that's created. And I'm wondering if maybe there's a place in the midst of those conversations, or maybe after those conversations, after the fire of that conversation sort of uh, dwindles, that perhaps it's possible to say, you know what, I know that you and I believe very differently politically, and I so completely don't understand where you're coming from, but I totally respect your right to think the way that you think. I actually had met somebody a while ago who had very, very strong political opinions, and I was talking about uh, someone I knew who was at radical odds with what this person was believing, and they said I couldn't have a relationship with that person because of their beliefs. And I guess we get to look at, where is that line? Where is the line that we draw to say, if you believe this, I cannot respect your ability or your belief. I cannot respect you as a human being. I cannot interact with you. I mean, I think that there may be lines that we feel we can't cross. And in terms of being able to extend that respect or that acceptance of another, particularly if there is hatred or violence that is part of the other person's belief system. And I'm wondering, how do we navigate these territories where we're dealing with degrees of opposition, degrees of difference? Where do we draw the line, and what is possible as we draw those lines? What's possible in terms of communication once those lines are drawn? Is there any kind of communication? Is there any kind of resolution? Is there any kind of understanding that's possible when we make these hard lines? Abuelita says, you got to know my husband. He's always right. We've been married for 44 years and he knows the way I believe. I got you, Abuelita. Well, it sounds like after 44 years, you figured out a good strategy to deal with the differences that you guys have, right? And if that's walking away, good for you. If that's what works. I'm just sort of probing these questions because I think it's really, really important as we move forward in the world to look at what creates separation and where we can build bridges. And I think that there's so many factions that are breeding foment and that are breeding disconnection and disrespect. And I think that we need to look and see how can we move beyond that? How can we find strategies for deeper connection, deeper understanding? Because the more oppositional we are, the more fighting, the more oriented toward fighting that we are, the more we stay stuck, the more we perpetuate the existing circumstances. And I'm thinking with people that are on the opposite side of politics, maybe not your husband, Abuelita. I'm going to leave that to your wisdom and discretion there, but maybe there's a way to find common ground. What I understand and what I've always noticed about about conflict resolution is that we can't solve a problem from the level that the problem emerged. So the way to solve conflict is to move into a higher level of perspective, higher values. So when we are conversing with somebody that has an opposing idea or opinion, what we get to do is maybe elevate to a level where we find commonality so that we can meet each other in our humanness and in our similarity. And then that place of connection gives us the opportunity to move into or to expand that connection and to expand that understanding. And maybe in reaching a deeper understanding, we can find a middle ground that wasn't otherwise visible. I'm just playing with these ideas, and I invite you to play with me here. Like how can we create more connection? Because we believe our beliefs like they're true. You know, we believe the things we believe like it's fact, like it's immutable. And the people that don't agree with us believe their beliefs in the same way. And so I'm wondering what happens if we play with these ideas without as deep a need to defend or convince um, or enroll people in our own perspective. I know that I have some very strong beliefs about things, and I want to be able to communicate those perspectives in ways that are going to motivate people to action and to embracing the importance of the things that I believe so deeply. And I have encountered people on occasion that are just like, you know what? I hear that that matters for you. Doesn't matter for me. Let somebody else deal with it. It's not important. And sometimes I've seen myself get caught in the momentum of really trying to get somebody to see how important something is. And what I've realized is, like you said, Abuelita, sometimes the best medicine is simply to walk away in order to keep the peace. Not to walk away in a huff, but to walk away and say, okay, you get to have your point of view, I get to have mine, and maybe we don't meet. So I'm curious if you guys have an opinion about moving toward unity, the value of moving toward unity or connection. Maybe not unity, maybe we will never agree, but maybe we can agree compassionately to disagree. And I all in this listening, when I come to a conversation knowing that we have opposite viewpoints, am I going to be able to see the places where we connect? If I come to a conversation expecting to be attacked, am I going to be able to hear you and the real voice of your heart? If I come to a conversation listening for what we have in common, am I going to be able to hear more of that? So the wrap up of this conversation around listening is, let's be alert to what we listen for. If we're listening for the same old story, that's probably what we'll hear. If we're listening to hear a nuance or something new, maybe there's something more available to us uh, when in that encounter. So I invite you to explore this whole idea of listening and what you're bringing to your listening and how that impacts your conversations with others. And if there's a way to allow yourself to be neutral in your listening, to sort of get yourself out of the picture and hear the thing that the other person is saying as their vantage point, as their experience. That ultimately, even if they're telling you things about you, it's their experience of who they are perceiving you to be. For instance, whatever it is they're saying is a reflection of their perspective, their perception, their experience, and ultimately, it really doesn't have to do with you. And when you hear things from that vantage point, then what happens? I think then we have the opportunity to open to magic. So Abuelita says, I just learned to let go of stuff. Don't let the negative stuff hold you back. I still love him the way he is. I don't let negative stuff come between our love. Well, that's beautiful, Abuelita. And 44 years testifies to that. So that's hugely powerful, and a big credit to you to be able to just love him for who he is. And Dido says, I like the phrase from William Ury, going to the balcony, taking a broader perspective, breathing, not having to win or reason with someone. Beautiful. I had not heard of William Ury, and I never heard of that phrase, going to the balcony, but I love it. And really, that's what we're talking about, is being able to step outside of our own attachments in listening to others, to be able to be compassionately present. And yeah, and also listening to ourselves. We didn't really talk much about listening to our own wisdom, and also being able to stand back and listen to ourselves in a certain circumstance to say, whoa, 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 that's not who I want to be, that's not how I want to be, and to step back, to take a step onto the balcony for a moment and reset, as you did so brilliantly, Dido, with your partner. So, another morning. I just want to say thank you so much for being here and for sharing in this conversation. And this is the Core Connection. I'm here every weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern, and I just am so grateful to you for these opportunities to be digging deeper and looking at life and awakening. And here on the Enlightened World Network, you can find lots more programming that's aligned with waking up and just experiencing the beauty of connection and life and love. So hope you were here. Thank you. I'm so glad you were here and joined us. Good afternoon to you. And Dido, you're so welcome. It's such a pleasure and joy. So wonderful day to all of you, and I hope I see you again tomorrow.